Spirit of life.
Good morning. Our story today
Welcome to the 11 a.m. service of First Unitarian Church of Toledo this March 14th, 2021, streamed live and recorded on YouTube to keep us safe during these times. We all look forward to meeting in person again. Until then, we are grateful for the ways that we can stay connected. I have several announcements this morning. Our senior minister, the Reverend Dr. T.K. Barger, is on sabbatical during the month of March. Please note that our phone system is out of order. You may contact us via email until we get our new system. If you need to contact us while Reverend T.K. is on sabbatical, please contact our church administrator, Carol Slomka, carols@uutoledo.org. Sandra Kosick, our board president, or David Strickler, our commissioned lay leader, who is leading the service this morning. Our new Caring Circle chair is Joanne Hartaw. If you have illness or needs that the Caring Circle can help with, please contact her at joannehartaw@gmail.com. Thank you, Joanne, for taking this position, and many, many thanks to Marcia Gamble, who has served so faithfully in this position. Our annual fundraiser, Guest at Your Table, supporting the work of the UUSC, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, will be virtual this year. If you have internet capability, go to uusc.org/resources, and then you can check your UUFYI for details. Our Mother's Day Flower Sale 2021 is now through Sunday, April 18th. You will find the order form in your UUFYI. And now we will begin our morning service.
I have these words from Gretchen Haley. There is nothing you need to bring with you to be welcome here. No right beliefs or proof of citizenship. No eternal optimism or clarity of conviction. No boundless courage or endless expertise. You do not need to know what brought you here or how you will solve that problem you are turning over and over in your mind. Your bills do not need to be paid, and your checkbook can be a mess. Your children may have been up half the night, your hearing aids may not be working, and your knees may be creaking. You do not need to be already perfect or even halfway to belong to this circle where grace meets us where we are, but that does not leave us as it found us. A circle where love resides in each of us, yet is somehow more than all. A circle where life still pulses and rages and heals and transforms, creating us and this day anew once again. Come, let us worship together.
Our chalice lighting today is by Katie Gelfand, The Abundance of Our Lives Together. We light our chalice as a symbol of gratitude as we celebrate the abundance of our lives together. In this sanctuary, we harvest bushels of strength for one another and offer our crop with the hands of compassion and generosity. In the authentic and gentle manner of our connections, we cultivate a simple sweetness to brighten our spirits. May we be grateful for the ways we nourish and uplift each other, for it is the sharing of this hallowed time together that sustains us.
Please join me in reciting the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Our anthem today will be Amazing Grace. These lyrics are in your hymnal under number 205.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been here 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've known less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun.
Good morning. Our story today is called Tiny the God. It's been adapted for our service, and it's written by Becky Brooks. Once upon a time, there was a tiny, little, itty-bitty, very small, tiny little God named Tiny. She lived her life hearing stories of all the big gods, and well, let's face it, she was jealous. She knew she needed to think of some kind of special spark of an idea that would make her existence meaningful. After watching humans for a long time, she hit upon something that just might work. Something to make people think. Yeah, that's something that Tiny really got a good idea going over. This was it. This was going to make her famous. Ready? Here it is. You are not alone. She took the form of a very light breeze, and in a voice so quiet each person heard it only in their mind. She said, "You are not alone. You are not alone." Pretty soon, Tiny was comforting people all over with, "You are not alone." Every evening, she took the form of a breeze and whispered it in people's minds, until one day she encountered someone who wasn't comforted at all. When Miriam heard Tiny's words, in her mind, instead of feeling comforted, she felt agitated. Something was just kind of off about it. She kept saying it to herself over and over again. "You are not alone. You are not alone." She tossed and turned. She couldn't sleep. Tiny was surprised. It hadn't occurred to her that someone might think of it that way. She noticed, however, when Miriam turned in her grocery order, she bought a few extra items for her neighbor and left them with a colorful note on their porch. But most importantly for Tiny, she noticed when Miriam received a phone call one evening from a friend she hadn't heard from in a long while. His voice was shaking. "I'm having a hard time," he said. He started to tell her about his troubles, but he began to cry. Miriam got herself comfortable in her favorite chair. She said, "I'll take your time. I'll stay on the line with you. You are not alone. I am here." Upon hearing that, Tiny went to work. Instead of just spending her evenings spreading the gospel of "You are not alone," she spent her nighttime doing it too, and her mornings and afternoons. Pretty soon she was spending every moment doing it until she became the breeze itself. And that is why there are no paintings of Tiny, no busts or holy books, just a breeze, a low voice, and many, many helping hands, loving hearts, and caring spirits. You can hear the echo if you listen closely. You are not alone. I am here. When water bottles are left in the desert for those who risk their lives to cross it, you are not alone. I am here. At the bedside of a dying person, you are not alone. I am here in the jailhouse and in the sanctuary. You are not alone. I am here. Separate and together, you are not alone. I am here. May it be so.
Our anthem today comes from our teal hymnal. This is Sekeli Blessing.
All Where there is faith, there is love. Where there is love, there is peace. Where there is peace, there is blessing. Where there is blessing, there is God. Where there is God, there is no
Please join me for this time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. Earlier this week, the news was full of personal strife in the British royal family. News which prompted me to wonder about the lingering effects of colonialism and racism. Then we were reminded of the first anniversary of the death of Breonna Taylor and the personal loss experienced by her surviving family and friends. We grieve over the excruciatingly slow pace of accountability and justice. At this time, we hold in our thoughts our family and friends who may be grieving personal losses or suffering from illness or physical pain or COVID isolation. This week, we also heard news that brings hope. The vaccine rollout seems to be progressing well, and spring is arriving in its usual erratic fashion. I'd like to share this contemplation from Bruce Southworth. We pause this hour to honor the Spirit and to accept ourselves as fragile humans, equally full of nobility and strength. We gather, weary of life's trials, yet cheered by infinite possibilities for love's grace. We meet with smiles and glad voices for old friends and new, every stranger a gift of potential friendship. We rejoice in the keen intellect and the warm heart. We remember those whose opportunities and needs our society thwarts. And we give thanks for the blessings that are ours. We praise all who extend a hand in service and whose vision of justice commands action. We gather together in this virtual space. We meet together in this metaphorical space. We rejoice together. We give thanks together. We praise together, and together we proclaim our community. Let us now pause together for a minute of silent reflection.
Our reading this morning is from an interview with Sarah Schmarsh about her biography of Dolly Parton. Yes, there is some real kairos, I think, to just the almost divine timing of her being, you know, in her full glory as a realized icon, receiving attention she should have received a long time ago for her creative genius and big heart. Precisely at a moment when we are somewhat lacking in national figures and certainly public leaders who we might say embody grace. And I think if there is one word that sums up Dolly, that would be it. And we could all use a little bit of that right now.
I chose today's reading not because I plan to evangelize about the divine timing or the full glory of a realized icon, but because the reading prompted two questions in my mind. Questions that hinge on the meanings of two words. First, the biographer, Sarah Schmarsh, states, there is some real kairos to the timing of her being. What does that word kairos mean? After a simple search, I found that kairos is an ancient Greek word meaning the right, critical, or opportune moment. The ancient Greeks had two words that we translate as time, chronos and kairos. The former refers to chronological or sequential time, while the latter signifies a proper or opportune time for action. It hadn't occurred to me that our word time has these two different meanings. And it is just another example of how difficult it must be to learn English as a second language. When I read that article back last fall, I agreed that it was kairos. It was the right moment for a unifying personality to counter the divisiveness in our country, a unifier with integrity and compassion. So that first question, that first word, was easy to work through. However, the second question that this article prompted was much more challenging. Why did the author describe Dolly Parton as embodying grace? I admit that at one time, I smugly dismissed Dolly Parton as just a hick country western performer who sang corny songs and used her superficial brand of sky-high bleached blonde hair and garish clothing to gain attention. But then I listened to the album Trio that she recorded in 1987 with Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt. I changed my opinion. I enjoyed her singing, I respected her musicianship, and I admired her songwriting. Over the years, I came to appreciate her self-deprecating sense of humor and her generous spirit. For example, Dolly founded a charity, Imagination Library, to send free books to children in Sevier County, Tennessee, where she was raised in a small two-room cabin. That organization now sends free, high-quality books to children from birth to age 5 all over the U.S. However, I didn't think of Dolly as embodying grace. So in the case of my second question, my stumbling block was not an obscure ancient word. It was a common English word, grace. Let's consider some of the ways that we might use the word grace or its related forms. We might describe a dancer as graceful. Trees are sometimes just characterized as having a graceful shape. There was a time in the distant past when people invited family and friends to dinners or parties in their homes. A host that welcomed their guests and thoughtfully accommodated their needs would be complimented as a gracious host. Perhaps we can revive this usage someday soon. There are grace notes in music, typically brief notes which embellish the principal note that follows. Grace notes are ornamental. They are not essential to the melody or the harmony. Your grace may be used to address high-ranking persons in the United Kingdom, which might suggest that dukes and archbishops are, well, just non-essential ornaments as well. There are a handful of common phrases or sayings. For instance, you might have a grace period on a credit card or on a loan payment. You might say of someone that his saving grace was his accordion playing. But more commonly, you'll hear the phrase, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Shortly after I submitted the title and summary of this sermon to our UU FYI newsletter, I started seeing posts on Facebook with the label Grace and the hashtag UU Lent. I saw a photo of President Obama escorting an elderly Nancy Reagan. I saw a photo of a toddler who clearly brought grace to the grandparent who chose to post it. If you have images of grace, I invite you to post or repost them on the First Unitarian Church of Toledo Facebook page. If you have verbal examples of grace or stories of grace, you could also post those. You might want to consider, when have you observed an act of grace? When have you received grace? Or how can you give grace? Returning to my list, people say grace before a meal to thank God, or perhaps to acknowledge the people who labored to grow the food and prepare it. My favorite cookbook title is Seasoned with Grace. I bought the cookbook from the Sabbath Day Shaker community in Maine. The Shakers were an 18th century English sect, so the recipes were disappointingly bland. The cookbook title was definitely more memorable than the recipes. The cookbook title is also a clever reference to Colossians 4:6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. The etymology of the word grace might help us understand how these different meanings and usages are connected. The English word grace is derived from the Latin word gratias or gratia, which gave rise to related words in the Romance languages such as gracias in Spanish and grazie in Italian. The linguistic roots can be traced further back to ancient Greek. Although the connection may not be obvious, the Latin word gratii came from the Greek charites, which refers to the three sister goddesses, bestowers of charm and beauty, who are often depicted as dancing in a circle. In Greek mythology, Charis refers to one of the charites. Those two related Greek words, charis and charites, gave rise to our English words charisma and charity, and indirectly to two other words, caress and cherish, which enter the English language from the Greek via French. The New Testament of the Christian Bible was written in Greek and uses the word charis over 140 times. Thus, grace is an important word in Christian theology, and in the most generic sense, usually refers to undeserved merit. Christian denominations interpret and emphasize grace in different ways. I'm most familiar with the Lutheran concept of grace from confirmation class as a teenager. In his effort to reform the Roman Catholic Church and to challenge some practices, Martin Luther studied the Bible and concluded that forgiveness of sins and personal salvation are obtained through faith by the grace of God. The painting on the cover of the Order of Service has been described as the most influential image of the Lutheran Reformation. The left side shows the law of the Old Testament as well as Adam and Eve, before they fell from grace. The right side shows the Lutheran theology of salvation, redemption by faith in the sacrifice of Jesus and through God's grace. Although Luther's concept of salvation by grace was meant to challenge the excesses that had resulted from the Catholic concept of salvation by works, grace is an important part of Roman Catholicism. For instance, after baptism or doing penance, one may enter a state of grace. And the famous rosary prayer begins, "Hail Mary, full of grace." The subsequent Protestant reformers created subspecies of divine grace. Shortly after Luther, John Calvin developed the concept of irresistible grace. In his view, salvation is only for those predestined by God. Salvation comes by the grace of God. Initially, you might reject faith and salvation, but ultimately, since God is omnipotent, you can't resist it, as long as you are one of the select or predestined. The Pilgrims and Puritans who colonized Massachusetts Bay were Calvinists. Almost 2 centuries after Calvin, John Wesley emerged out of an evangelical revival movement that swept through Britain and spread to America. Wesley reformed some of Calvin's doctrines and developed a version of grace which could be described as resistible, though it is now called prevenient grace. To paraphrase Wesley, the grace of God is free in all and free for all. The Methodist societies that John Wesley founded within the Church of England became the dominant form of the independent Methodist movement that continues to this day. Starting with John Wesley, the Methodists have a long history of working to address social injustices. As an aside, I want to encourage you to attend next week's Spiritual Adventures led by Reverend Larry Clark from the Monroe Street United Methodist Church to learn about an affordable housing project in Toledo. The most important Protestant reformer for us is also named John. John Murray started out as an Anglican, joined the same revival movement a few years after John Wesley, but then came under the influence of a Universalist preacher. After losing his son to sudden illness, and then his wife, and then experiencing financial troubles, John Murray emigrated to lose himself in America. The tragedies continued when his ship was blown off course and got stranded off the coast of New Jersey. In an unusual turn of events, Murray was convinced by a local resident to deliver the first sermon at a new chapel in September 1770. Murray's sermon on universal salvation was well received and started him on a successful career path in parish ministry. He became known as the father of American Universalism for his message of divine love and grace for all, regardless of personal belief or faith. I want to sound a note of caution about grace from a 20th century Lutheran minister. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a theologian and a dissident in Nazi Germany. When asked how it was possible for the church to sit back and let Hitler seize absolute power, Bonhoeffer replied, "It was the teaching of cheap grace." To paraphrase, cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship. Bonhoeffer's comments suggest that grace requires mutuality. And in my 21st century interpretation, expecting to receive grace from another without considering your own behavior is ungraceful. Demanding grace from others while avoiding accountability or without admitting your mistakes is manipulative and thus disgraceful. As you use our heritage includes different theologies of grace. And some of these theologies teach us that we all receive grace, regardless if we are Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Buddhists, Sikhs, Sufis, heretics, humanists, agnostics, or even atheists. As UUs, we affirm and support justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, as well as acceptance of one another. Thus, I think we need to consider how we can give grace. As part of the Commissioned Lay Ministry training, I was encouraged to become familiar with organizations that work to identify and address racist behaviors and systemic racism. Two of these organizations teach that there are problematic behaviors present many places in our country. The organizations that I reference are SURJ, S-U-R-J, Stand Up for Racial Justice, and DismantlingRacism.org. The characteristics they refer to are present in for-profit and non-profit organizations. The leadership of our Unitarian Universalist Association acknowledges that such characteristics are also present in our liberal progressive organization and that we need to address them. Examples of these harmful characteristics include defensiveness, individualism, sense of urgency. I want to focus on perfectionism because the proposed solutions, I think, lead us to graceful actions. For example, perfectionism is present in an organization when little appreciation is expressed for the work that others are doing. Perfectionism is present when it is common to point out how the person or their work is inadequate. Or even worse, to talk to others about the inadequacies of a person or their work without ever directly talking to the subject. Perfectionism is present when mistakes are seen as personal, so that making a mistake is confused with being a mistake. These websites give antidotes to perfectionism. Develop a culture of appreciation, taking time to ensure that people and their work are appreciated. When offering feedback, speak to the things that went well as offering criticism. Ask people to offer specific suggestions for how to do things differently or better. Separate the person from the mistake. These behaviors will develop a learning organization where it is understood that everyone will make mistakes. SURJ and DismantlingRacism.org present these characteristics, these behaviors, under the banner of white supremacy culture. This term does not refer to white supremacist hate groups. Rather, it refers to culture. As Tima Akun explains, culture is powerful precisely because it is so present and at the same time so very difficult to name or identify. The characteristics listed here are damaging because they are used as norms and standards without being proactively named or chosen by the group. Because we all live in a white-dominated culture, these characteristics show up in the attitudes and behaviors of all of us, people of color and white people. Therefore, these attitudes and behaviors can show up in any group or organization, whether it is predominantly white or whether it is predominantly people of color. In my view, behaviors such as perfectionism are often unwelcoming and can be oppressive to people from historically marginalized groups. Recognizing and changing these behaviors in ourselves can help us become more compassionate and graceful and make our congregation more welcoming to new people. Before closing, I want to reconsider Dolly. The Imagination Library has distributed 150 million books to children, regardless of family income or circumstances. That is charity on a very large scale. That is unmerited favor. No matter which language you choose, that project meets at least one definition of grace. On a smaller personal scale, each of us can give grace in different ways. We can learn to be aware of behaviors or norms that are unwelcoming or oppressive. We can practice forgiveness of mistakes, acceptance of imperfections, affirming others despite their flaws. We can display kindness and generosity. This is our kairos. This is an opportune time to affirm, to accept, to forgive, to display kindness and generosity, and to graciously receive unmerited favor from others. May our words be seasoned with grace, and may our actions add the flavor of Unitarian Universalism to this world. Blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, David. We're so fortunate to have you as our commissioned lay minister, and you've given us a lot to think about this morning. It's now time to talk about the offering. We thank you all for your generous pledges and the offerings that you have continued to make to keep this vibrant community and all of its programs possible. You may donate online by clicking the Give button at the top of our website, uutoledo.org, and following the instructions for online giving. You may contact our bookkeeper at bookkeeper@uutoledo.org to set up automatic payments or to discuss your pledge. Or you may always send a physical check to our street address, 3205 Glendale Avenue, Toledo 43614. Coming soon. Our spiritual adventures next week, David already mentioned, is a wonderful presentation from the Reverend Larry Clark on Bluff Street Village, which is a tiny house project. And that will be at 10 a.m. on Zoom. Our 11 a.m. service will be a missed education, Unitarian Universalism and Religious Education, a collection of stories you may have missed, led by Reverend Soroya King, our interim Religious Education Director. And now our closing words are by Charles A. Howe. May we go forth from this place thankful for the life that sustains and renews us, and open to the grace that surrounds and surprises us. May we go forth from this place with openness and with thanksgiving.
And before we send the flame, I'm going to insert an extra element in this service. I want to thank today's technical crew who are here, who aren't on screen. Arun, Tom, Robin, Eric. I want to thank Bonnie Rowe for her wonderful piano playing, and Mickey Emsch for her beautiful singing, and to Soroya for reading the story today. I also want to thank Judy Troutman for serving as worship associate, and I hope that we all wish Judy a happy birthday today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Finally, my friends, rejoice. Aim for restoration. Comfort one another. Give grace to one another. live in peace, so that the spirit of love and peace will be with you.